Hey everybody, and welcome to my first of two videos on this, the Mamiya Sekor 1000 TL. So this is an interchangeable lens, single lens reflex camera. What that means is it has one lens on the front that can be taken off with different lenses put back on. And there's a reflex mirror in here that directs the light from the lens to the eyepiece in the back. And you use that to focus, and then when you take a picture, that mirror flips up and the light goes to the film. This has only one type of meter. It has a spot meter, and we'll see that in the second video, and I'll talk about how to use that. It has shutter speeds of bulb and 1 second to 1/1000th of a second. The camera has 95% viewfinder magnification, which means that what you see through the viewfinder is 95% of the size of what will appear on the film. I could not find anywhere what the viewfinder frame coverage is, but it felt like it was about 92 to 95%. And what that means is that if this is the image you're going to get on your film, anything less than 100 things, the viewfinder starts to encroach on the image from the sides and then the top and bottom. It gives you a little bit more framing once you get your actual image back. So having a little bit of image loss in the viewfinder is not an issue because you still get it on the film. This has a matte focusing screen with micro prism core and a fine focus collar, and the flash syncs at 1/60th of a second, which is why that is red. Mamiya made these 1000 TL and similar cameras for entry and first-time users. There was a 1000 and a 500. The 500 was a lower end model than this because it only went up to 1/500th of a second. But they targeted specifically with their advertising campaigns the first-time user for these cameras, and interestingly, they are cameras which have a number of professional grade capabilities and interfaces, and one of the many reasons I think that Mamiya ended up not succeeding as a 35mm manufacturer was because of the way that the metering worked in the TL and later DTL cameras. But I do believe that Mamiya saw 35mm cameras as a stepping stone to medium format for people, and that might also be a bit incorrect because I don't think most people get a 35mm camera and suddenly say, I've mastered that, I want to carry something bigger and more complicated to use around with me. So these cameras were technologically advanced and designed by people who were very used to designing cameras for professionals. And so I think that's also why first-time users didn't cling to it, because it really is laid out like a professional's 35mm camera. So this was made by Mamiya in Japan from 1966 to about 1968. I couldn't find exactly when these went out of production, so 68 is a guess, based on when the subsequent model went into production. This was preceded by the Prismat series of cameras, kind of, in that the Prismats and then later the TLs were their first two M42 bodies. Other than that, these actually don't have a whole lot in common with the Prismat cameras. This was concurrent with the TL 500 and followed by the DTL 1000. So if you have your TL 1000, let's take a look at the camera's different features and what they are. Starting with the top, here, even though they're on the sides, are the camera strap lugs, and this is what you would attach your camera strap to. This is the film rewind knob, and film rewind lever pops out of it. Here, this line and circle, that's the film plane indicator, letting you know exactly where the film is inside of the camera's body. This is the shutter speed dial, where you can select your shutter speed. And if you lift the ring, you can select your ISO. There's a DIN indicator up here because back when these were made, DIN was still in use as a film speed indication. But for any film you would buy today, DIN has been obsolete for decades, and so ASA and ISO are the same thing. So if you buy 100 ISO film, you would set your ASA to 100. This line right here indicates your shutter speed. This is your shutter release button. That's what actually activates the shutter to take the picture. This is the film advance lever and also rearms the shutter. This button right here, to take a light meter reading, what you do is you push the film lever in, and I'll show you how that works in the second video. To bring the film arm back into the body, you simply push this button on top, and then here is the frame count window. Here is the camera's front, and there's not a whole lot to see. We're going to start with the self timer right here, which you wind by rotating it 180 degrees. So one thing that Mamiya did very intelligently with this self timer is have it move in a counterclockwise direction. So you arm it going this way. Most self timers count down going that direction. Now imagine if you're holding the camera to take a picture when you hit the self timer, where's that self timer lever going to go? If it hits something on its way, it's not going to complete the countdown, and that can be distracting or screw up your picture at worst. So by having the timer go counterclockwise, you can hold the camera if you need to while the self timer is counting down. And as you saw, all you have to do to activate it is push the little button behind here, and that activates the self timer and then takes the picture at the end of the self timer countdown. This is the lens mount right here. It's a standard M42 lens mount. Here is the aperture paddle, and this, as you might have seen when it took the self timer exposure, pops forward and hits a little pin on the back of the lens to stop down the aperture. On the sides of the lens mount we have two little ports, X and FP. These are your flash ports. FP is for the old bulb type flashes, so you won't in any probability ever use that. X is for electronic or modern flashes, and so any flash you could buy in the store today, you could connect with a cable to that port and have a flash sync with this camera. On this side here is the film back release that you simply lift up to pop open the back of the camera. On the back of the camera we have the film back itself, the door that opens when you need to get inside the camera. The company's Mamiya Camera Company Limited. The viewfinder, and if you look on the top of the viewfinder, some eyepiece grooves that you would use to attach various accessories to the viewfinder. The camera's bottom doesn't have a whole lot. We have a tripod bushing here, which is a very different location than most tripod bushings in that it's much further forward on the camera body, but that provides for a nice even weighting with longer lenses. This is the battery compartment cover, made in Japan, the serial number, and then the film release button right there. So next let's take a look inside this camera, and like I showed before, you just lift up on the film back release. This one doesn't like to open. And here we are inside the camera. So here is the film chamber. This is where you will put the film when you go to load film to take pictures. These four silver rails are the film guide rails, and what they do is as the film comes out of the film cassette, these outer two keep the film from moving up and down so that it feeds smoothly through the camera. These middle two work with the film pressure plate, which we'll see in a second, to sandwich the film so that it's flat on plane when it's in front of the shutter here, and that the light from the lens focuses properly on the film. Then this opening is the shutter curtain, and shutter, don't touch the shutter curtain and don't stick your finger in it when it's open, because those are two good ways to ruin a shutter. This is the film tension sprocket. This keeps the film from being pulled backwards by the spring memory that is built into this coiled up plastic film back here. And so this keeps it from being pulled back. It also helps keep the film tense so that it's flat, and it moves forward as the film is advanced to help make sure that the film travels smoothly through the camera. That's the film take-up spool right here. the film take-up spool winds up the film as it travels through the camera, so it has a place to go as your images are taken. Here is the film back. This is the pressure plate that I was talking about that sandwiches the film up against the guide rails to keep it flat on plane. And this is a film cassette retaining clip that helps to keep the film in the chamber the way it's supposed to be as it's loading, winding film through the camera, so that the film exits the cassette properly. Basically, everything inside this camera is designed to make sure the film goes through it quickly and smoothly. Some notes on this camera: it was the first camera ever with a spot meter. And the spot meter just takes a very small part of the image and bases 100% of the metering off that part of the image. The spot meter in this camera always required that metering be performed separately from composing. And so it's intuitive for professionals, but unwieldy and cumbersome and counterintuitive for casual photographers. So the metering interface was very advanced and allowed the battery to not be depleted constantly. And I will say this, that the metering interface on this camera I think is actually better than Pentax's, Nikon's, and Miranda's, and Canon's, obviously. And it was very well thought out and well designed, but just not something that casual photographers could pick up and shoot away with, and so ultimately these weren't a market success. Some things not to do with this camera: don't touch the shutter that we saw inside of here. That's a good way to brick your camera. Don't touch the mirror that is inside of the shutter box, because the mirror is surface coated silver, and if your finger oils get on it, they will tarnish or remove that silver and make it harder to focus your camera accurately. Don't leave your camera or your lenses in your car, because that's a really good way to get heat damage. Oils will get thin and get to places they shouldn't be, and then when they resolidify, they shouldn't be there and they'll muck up the works. Or if it's very cold, then the oils will get broken down by the cold, and even if they're in the places they're supposed to be, they'll be gummy and won't work properly. Don't store your camera and lenses in a plastic bag or box, because moisture will get in there and it will cause fungus to grow on the leather or on the camera lens coatings and damage your photographic equipment, possibly making it not very usable. And just remember that your camera is a precision tool and should be handled with care and respect. And as long as you take care of your camera will take care of you. So that's it for my first video on the Mamiya 1000 TL. If you have any questions, please leave them below, and I am pretty good about answering them fairly quickly. If you have thoughts or comments, I'm always glad to hear those as well. If you are an amateur photographer who has taken photos with a 1000 TL, feel free to share a link to those photos in the description, or in the comments section rather. If you have suggestions for future videos, please let me know, and if I have the equipment and technical know-how, I'm more than happy to do that. And one last thing, thank you guys for watching, and take great photos.